for the warning. It's always good to know.
Twitch has accepted our stream.
Okay, good. Oh, and make sure about turning off your phones.
YouTube has accepted our stream.
Wonderful.
Waiting for Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I'm going to leave that on in case Eric calls.
Sure.
Facebook has accepted our stream.
Great. Okay, so we should be good to rock and roll, right?
Okay, you can see the countdown on the screen, Vicky.
Right. Yep.
When it says on the air, you are on the air.
Okay.
Here we go.
Welcome to Talking Peace with the Western New York Peace Center, being recorded here at Think Twice Radio in the home of the future, also the home of our friend and producer, Richard Wicca. Thanks, Richard. And we also thank our friends at WBNY, Buffalo's original alternative radio station, 91.3 FM. Thank you, Buff State University, our friends at Buff State University. And when I think of thankfulness, I think of our indigenous friends and how the Haudenosaunee, who are native to this area, and in particular the Seneca are native to where the studio is and to Buffalo. We think of, I think of how they start every event and every day really off with giving thanks to Mother Earth, giving thanks to all the plants and the medicinal and nutritional plants and the healing properties and the healers who use those plants and the creatures of all kinds, the swimming, crawling, four-leggeds, and the flying creatures that are so wonderful in our world, and to Brother Sun and Grandmother Moon and all of the heavens, to the winds that bring the changes that we so need, that move our air around for us, the trees that bring that, give us that air and that oxygen, and to all the people who are here, the people who make it happen, and to the Creator and all the love that the Creator brings that makes this creation possible. And then they say Nyahweh, and then the people say Nyo. So Nyahweh,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you. So, and the land acknowledgement, just that, I just want to say very plain out that we are on stolen and largely unceded land, Seneca land for right now here in the studio, and much of Western New York, certainly Buffalo, etc. And our indigenous brothers and sisters have so much wisdom and so much of a need for their own recognition, respect, and sovereignty. So we're always very privileged to learn from them and work with them, and so it's good to be here. It's good to be here with you all. So I'd just like to, we have a special double-header show in a way because we have our same group who's going to deal with two different issues that are, again, very related. So our first show is going to be on the death penalty. And we have Chuck Culhane here. Hi, Chuck.
Hello.
So Chuck can tell you some of his story, how he ended up on death row, how he ended up off of death row, and how he's been a fighter for stopping the execution, stopping the death penalty, and so many other justice issues for so long. So thank you, Chuck. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And we also have, I'll start with Ladaisha Williams, who has been our emerging leader, has been awarded our Emerging Leaders Award, the Western New York Peace Center's Emerging Leaders Award in, I want to say
21.
Was it 21?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in 21. Yep, in 21. And is a board member, is our liaison to Free the People, who's very involved in a lot of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. So thanks for coming, Ladaisha.
Absolutely. Absolutely glad to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you here. And I want to say, and to have so many years of watching you grow and develop, and what a wonderful emerging leader you are.
Thank you. It has been some time. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not gonna get into Peace Jam and Camp Peace Prince and all that, but another day we will. And of course, Sameria Mbili, friend of the show, Sameria Mbili. Hi, Sameria.
Hi.
And certainly you've been on the show a number of times, especially actually just the last bunch of shows that
Yeah.
I did. You were co-hosting them with me.
Yeah, with the World Indigenous People Day, I was there for that one.
Yep, and then
the nuclear weapons with Jim.
right.
Yeah.
Yep, two very powerful shows. Anybody who hasn't heard those shows, I would just say you can go to the YouTube channel of the Western New York Peace Center. You can hear those shows. They were excellent, if I do say so, because we were privileged to have some wonderful emerging indigenous young leaders as well, and Sameria as well. So anyway, so thanks for coming on. So talking about the and I didn't introduce myself, Victory Ross or Vicky Ross or Victoria Ross, whatever people want to use. I've reclaimed my teenage nickname of Victory, but I answer to all of those and then some. But anyway, I'm the board chair at the Western New York Peace Center, and glad and grateful to Deidre Emel, the executive director, and glad and grateful to still be doing some of these Talking Peace shows. So, so this one on the death penalty is a very big one, and Chuck and I have talked for a while about him coming on again to do this show. So before we get into the topic, fully into the topic, we can just go around on our regular, usual way of talking about the values that we want to uplift in this topic. So, so why don't we start with you, Sameria, and then we'll go around to Chuck. We'll just go around like that. So, Sameria,
Some of my values about, in particular about the death penalty, I would have to say just human life in general, valuing, looking at other people as human, not just someone that you have no remorse for, and also justice and love.
Well, thank you. Yes, those are all so important. That respect for and valuing of life, and justice and love. That makes me think of Cornel West says justice is what love looks like in public.
Yeah,
So,
I like that.
Yeah, isn't that great? And Chuck?
Yeah. Well, following up what Sameria said, how do you make a point of condemning violence and killing by violently killing the person who was, I mean, it's just, it doesn't make sense. It's illogical. It's immoral. I mean, there's a whole slew of factors against the death penalty. It kind of boils down, though, to people having reactions, emotional reactions to events, and that's understandable, totally understandable. But I think the difference between wanting some form of justice requires more than a reaction. I think it requires reflection and going beyond the surface of things to see what's really going on. And when it comes to the death penalty, it's the state and the government kind of wielding an awesome power, and power that they shouldn't have. Because once you can kill people legally, you can do almost anything else, So.
Right. Yeah, you're so right. Well, thank you, Chuck. That's so eloquently put. It's no wonder I did put that on the description of you. You're, as a poet, you do have a gift for describing things and explaining them in ways that people understand.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
I don't understand it half the time.
Well, there's a lot to understand.
when
but,
I'm not discombobulated, I can understand.
right. Well, we do get discombobulated at times too, by our own admission. But anyway. And Ladaisha, what are some values that you think of with this topic?
Values that I think of would be life. I mean, who doesn't value life? It's, definitely something to experience. We're still here. I don't think anybody should have their life threatened, no matter who you are. I think the good thing about life is that as long as you wake up, you get another chance to try again and just kind of start over with a blank sheet of paper. And when we talk about this topic, it's so hard because it sounds like you're like robbing people of that chance. So,
Right.
that's kind of what I think about.
Well put.
That's great.
That's so beautifully put. Also, we're going to put you down as a poet too. Anyway, or you do. You have a way of putting things. So that is so true. And I keep thinking as you're speaking, I keep thinking of Albert Schweitzer, I think it was, who used the phrase. But I love this phrase, reverence for life. Which is really part of what we're talking about, that reverence for life, that valuing of life, that even awe about life, that it's such a phenomenal thing. I mean, it's hard to even understand that we have that gift of life with the consciousness that we have. So reverence for life. And the other thing I thought of, as Chuck was saying, and I always think of this is not a slogan I made up, but I think one of the groups in North Carolina used this phrase, or other anti-death penalty groups have said, why do we kill people to show people who kill people that killing people is wrong? Which makes me think of when I used to teach parenting, and it's the old "don't hit your sister" whap. So I mean, we have to be the change that we want to see. So killing people to show people that killing people, it just doesn't make sense.
When you put it like that, it sounds like it doesn't work.
Right, and it doesn't work. Yeah. That's the other thing we know. And there's all the other things about it, so we'll get into that. Some of the other things about it, like the deep-seated racism and dysfunction of our criminal justice system, and all the other reasons why it also doesn't work. But before we get into that, I'd love it if you're willing, Chuck, to just sort of tell your story and sort of your story of death row, and then your story of your activism, how that has all evolved.
Well, I went to prison for an armed robbery. I was not doing. I was not, let's say, a good member of society at the time. Sticking people up, and is not in the community's or my own best interest.
Right.
But I had to go through a lot to get to some basic. Find some basic changes. But anyway, I held up a gas station. There was a shootout, and I got shot a couple of times. And fortunately survived, and was sent away. And a couple of years later, was going back to court with two other men in a car with two deputies. And one of the prisoners made an attempt to escape and came up with the passenger deputy in the front, come up with his gun and told the other deputy, I don't want to hurt you. I just want the handcuff key. And the deputy said, okay. And he was reaching to his belt like he was going to get the handcuff key. And he spun around and he shot him. And the prisoner, Robert Bauman, he fired back one shot. And the deputy fired again. And Bauman died almost instantly. The bullets went crisscross his lungs, heart, liver, everything was just shattered. And the deputy continued to fire into the back of the car. And he shot the other prisoner, Gary McGivern, shot him through the elbow. One bullet went into the seat of the car, and then the last bullet was a 5-shot 38 revolver. The last shot, I remember I was just ducking as the bullets were going
Right.
off. I was just reflexively going down,
Mhm.
and I remember my forehead hitting the drive shaft in the car. And when that happened, I put my hands behind my head, and the deputy come over the seat and he fired one bullet through my hands
Mm.
into the back of my head.
Mm.
And I think, well, I have an Irish skull, which is a definite plus. You know, that'll stop bullets sometimes, or make it harder to penetrate. And also, I think the fact that it went through my hands also slowed the trajectory. So the bullet lodged right next to my spine in the fatty tissue of the neck. And I lost consciousness immediately. So we were charged with aiding and abetting, and what's called the felony murder doctrine, where if you participate in an underlying crime, you're equally culpable to and responsible for any killing that takes place. So the surviving deputy said Gary did the shooting, and he didn't. You know, he never had a gun in his hand. And the deputy made himself out to be the one who lost his gun, to be the hero. I did this, I did that, I shot him, I shot Culhane. And, but the case started to come apart when the bullet they took out of my head came from the gun. He said I grabbed the gun from the other deputy and pointed at him, and then he shot me. But the bullet they took out of my head came from the gun that I was supposedly holding. So that case kind of unraveled early on.
Oh, good.
I bet.
Yeah. And they offered us off the bat like manslaughter, and we said no. We didn't shoot anybody. We didn't want to shoot anybody.
Right.
And
Right.
and the deputy is not telling the truth. So our first trial ended with a hung jury, with 4 jurors voting to acquit. And I was a little surprised, but the odds were kind of we're in prison for a robbery, and so it was a tough case. It was a tough sell to the jury, but 4 of them held out and said, no, there's something fishy going on here.
Right.
So anyway, the local newspaper, this is up in Kingston, New York, in Ulster County, kind of conservative area. I remember when we were driving into town, there was a big sign and it said Wallace for president. It was George Wallace down in Alabama, is it? Or Alabama, I think.
I think it was Alabama.
Yeah. He was like an
But
ultra...
anyway, he was
ultra-
definitely ultra-conservative Southerner.
Yeah. So anyway, we had our work cut out for us there. And the local newspaper said that the 4 jurors who didn't convict us violated their civic duty by not convicting us. They should have found us guilty and then let the appeals court determine our guilt or innocence. That's not the way the system works.
No.
The
Right.
system, guilt or innocence, is supposed to be determined by a jury.
Mm-hmm.
And they said they violated their civic duty. So they were instilling fear into the public mind.
Right.
And between the first and second trial, we had another trial 6 months later. There was a shootout in California with Angela Davis was eventually arrested for providing a van for the Soledad brothers and George Jackson's brother, trying to liberate some prisoners from San Quentin. And between the first and second trial that happened, and all across the country, any prison cases, any escape cases, any police cases became really hot. And when we went back for the second trial, I mean, it was just nuts. They had helicopters over the courtroom. They had guards in the hall with machine guns.
Oh my
People
God.
couldn't visit without, just, taking all their clothes off, crazy stuff. And it was in that armed camp atmosphere that we had our second trial, and were convicted and sentenced to death.
Mm-hmm.
So, I remember we fired the attorneys after we were found guilty, and represented ourselves during the penalty phase.
Uh-huh.
In New York, it was a two-phase
Right.
deal: the guilt or innocence, and then if you were found guilty, then you would go to what will the penalty be. So we fired the attorneys, and the judge said, "Well, let them sit there to consult with, if need be." So we found some interesting stuff while we were representing ourselves. Some evidence that had been suppressed, photos of the crime scene that would have favored our version of the events,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that. And but the jury came back with a death sentence recommendation. And I remember the lawyer saying, "Well, listen, don't feel too bad. This is your first case, I said, "Yeah, right. Thanks." and the other lawyer's advice was, "Don't sit down. We were sentenced to the electric chair." I said, "Very good." I have to remember those funny
Right.
times.
Yeah.
But at that time in New York, there had been a kind of moratorium on executions.
Mm-hmm.
There hadn't been an execution since 1963. So here we're talking about 1971,
Mm-hmm.
And this was a national phenomenon where there was only 2 executions in a 10-year period. And
Really?
Yeah.
In all the nation.
Yeah. And that was a result of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund had attorneys spearheading a national effort to get moratoriums in individual states, one
Mhm.
at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and they were able to pretty much halt the process. And then in a Supreme Court decision in 1972, the Supreme Court abolished the death penalty
Mm-hmm.
nationwide,
Right.
citing that it was applied in a manner that was freakish and like akin to getting hit by lightning. It was so arbitrary, and
Mm-hmm.
and the real underpinnings of the death penalty was its racial application.
Right.
And so off the bat, I knew that, like in New York, the last 15 people who were executed, I think 12 were black, 2 were Hispanic, and 1 was white. In a
Mhm.
state where the population, well, you know what the population is.
Right.
But so I wasn't worried so much about the death penalty as much as I was about being stuck in prison for 10, 20 or more years,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually how it turned out. I did 26 years after the conviction at the 3rd trial.
Mm-hmm.
They offered a plea to manslaughter, running concurrent with the time that we had from the robbery.
Uh-huh.
And my co-defendant, in his infinite wisdom, said, "Well, we want a recommendation that we be released at our first parole board." We were about a year or 2 from the parole board.
Uh-huh.
So it was really something to think about. Life, 2 years to the board, So, but anyway, the offer was taken off the table. We went to trial, and were convicted and got 25 to life.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then whole appeals process, but it was about a year and a half after we were there that the Supreme Court came down and abolished the penalty
Uh-huh.
nationwide. And it was like, it was just like, well, I thought it was a great step, personally, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and but I thought it was a great step for the country, for the legal system, an
Sure.
evolutionary step for our society,
Right.
to say no to killing.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think it would come back. I never thought that it would come back. And it was the rhetoric from politicians like Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, George Wallace. I mean, that kind of fired up the fear and the
So
and,
like,
the, and the fear.
okay. So I wanted to ask them, like, abolishing the death penalty at the time. Is that what gave you the opportunity to go back up for, like, they had to like reconsider how long you were going to be in there after that, or?
Well, back for the 3rd trial.
Mm.
The most of the cases, people just got a life sentence after the death penalty was knocked out. In our situation, they reversed the guilt innocence phase also, in the New York Court of Appeals. And one of the things that the judges there said was the prosecution's case presented substantial questions of credibility, and that was like, so they made what I felt was the best offer that they could, and but we didn't take it, and so from then until my release in the early '90s was a result of the third trial. Got 25 to life, so. Gary got clemency, my co-defendant, down the line, and then I got out like 3 years later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the early '90s. I was I was blessed all along. My family was always with me.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to develop as a person,
Mm-hmm.
a bit of a consciousness, and
Sure.
so it was like, if you're not going to wake up here, you're not going to wake up.
Right.
That's the end of the road. Right?
Well, that's one of the things. I mean, that's back to an argument for, not having the death penalty, is the developing and changing that people can do at any time. Just like you were saying, Ladaisha, of, if you're waking up, you have a new chance. Every day is a new day to realize things or, move on. And you certainly, I mean, you're an example, Chuck, of somebody who really, really has, just from, some of your creative work and lots of your activism and your service, for
agree.
other people.
Definitely agree on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've been such really a paragon in the community of thinking of other people or, trying to.
Well, my life was saved by other people. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, they worked for 10 years to stop the executions, and there was a whole army of, advocates and people who were against the killing. And so, I feel the least I can do is to give back and try to do something to stop the trend now. We were winning. We were winning. Every year another state was taking the death penalty out. Since it was reinstated in 1976, there's been like 1,500 plus executions since then around the country, mostly in the South, Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, and but the trend now, Trump kind of got the ball rolling again in the opposite direction by executing 13 federal prisoners in his last 6 months in office,
Mm-hmm.
including the only woman who was on death row in the federal system,
Mm-hmm.
and who had serious mental health problems, but Trump has serious mental health problems himself, you know what I mean?
Say that.
So, yeah. So
Say that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he doesn't want
Yeah.
anybody stealing the limelight there.
Before we get off, because this is about the death penalty, and it's not the, going over your whole life, but I do want to just, for you to make a mention of, some of the people that helped you along the way means that you developed a friendship with Pete Seeger and brought him to Buffalo for his last or next to the last public appearance, but also, and June License, who, God bless June, is
dear
herself such an icon, such a paragon of struggle for people.
Let me just mention June License was an educator, and she was coordinating in American Studies the program up at SUNY North Campus, and she turned what was basically a group into 6 departments: African American Studies, Puerto Rican Studies, Native American Rights, Women's Studies. Just phenomenal, and the administration wasn't too happy with her work with the prisons and with bringing college programs into the local prisons in Auburn, Wendy, different places. They were not happy with that, and in fact, a lot of people were not happy with prisoners getting an education inside. So we got to pay for us, and they're getting free education. Blah, blah. It worked. The education worked.
Right,
The studies they
right.
did showed that the more that people got formal education, the less likely they were to return. I mean, a radical drop in recidivism,
Right.
like from 40% down to like 5% for people who were able to
Right.
get, a 4-year degree. So, and so they, the system wanted to maintain itself and wanted to grow. The prison growth industry was it's just a crime in my mind.
It is a crime. It's the prison industrial complex. That's what it is. It's a money making. It's a job producing. And certainly putting the prisons in small rural towns for an employment for the towns is just
A lot of times
heinous.
it seems like they move in the opposite direction of what they, try to broadcast. Because one word I always keep in mind is rehabilitation.
Right.
That's what I thought it was supposed to do, but it seems like,
Right.
we're trying to make room. Like we're assuming that we're going to get people in instead of thinking of more ways of decreasing the number. But I know that there's good things being mentioned out there. I
Sure.
mean, like that are going on. I just wish that it was broadcasted a lot more, like that people would actually know. Like if a lot of more people knew about how education turned things around, maybe there'd be a lot less angry people, or maybe we'd be advocating for more. More people would be advocating.
Well, one of the things I'm thinking of that Richard, our producer Richard Wicca, had just mentioned before the show when we were talking about this was about the newspaper that was started in St. Quentin.
Yeah.
So were you here, Sameria, when he was talking about that?
No, I missed it.
Oh.
2008,
Go ahead.
they started up a newspaper in San Quentin, and he was mentioning some of the articles and the writings that prisoners were doing. I have some copies that my friend Eric, who's on death row in San Quentin now, unfortunately in California, they have like 700 people, men and women, on death row, but no executions. The governor said, as long as I'm governor, there won't be any people executed, which is great. But that leaves the door open, though, in case a Republican gets in who's
Right.
pro-death penalty. So there's work going on now to try to get rid of it altogether out there. But Eric might call us. I told him to try to call us before 8 o'clock.
Right.
And if he does, I'll get a chance to hear what's going on inside.
Well, he might. It's still a little time before then, or if he calls at any time while we're still broadcasting this show, or even the next show, we could, take his call.
So there's a newspaper that's out, and prisoners are writing in there. Are they on death penalty?
Some. I think the newspaper isn't just for people on death row.
Right.
But they contribute. I remember I contributed when I was and started up a newspaper in Green Haven when I was there, the Open Gate, and so we do articles about about current laws and and human interest stories, people's journey through the system. Racial disparity was always a focus of mine in writing and
Right.
because that's like that's the elephant in the room,
Right.
that the system is, it just works to the great detriment of minority communities.
Absolutely. And I wanted us to talk about that too, and that's where about the Innocence Project and the work that has been done. So what the racial disparities that are evident in the numbers of people incarcerated and the racial and ethnic makeup of those people. But also the Innocence Project, which showed back to what you were saying before, Chuck, about it could be the randomness or the lack of randomness, really, that the people who they're going to be poor, black, indigenous or people of color who are going to be, given the death penalty, and who are going to be not getting decent legal help, and who are going to be, that are very likely to, they're more likely to be innocent because they won't have had the legal help and because of the racism in the people making the decision makers.
Yeah.
So that's the people within the criminal justice system. That's the jurors who come on, right? It's all of it. So it's all working against those people. And so the Innocence Project that found, and I think they were focused on this. This was oh God, what's his name? Brian
Stevenson?
Yeah, Brian Stevenson started this work, and he was working with people who were on the death row, and finding person after person who was innocent, but they were on death row, and those were the people who were going to get killed. So it's not just that it doesn't make sense. Why do we kill people to show people who kill people that killing people was wrong? It's also that the people who are on death row very likely aren't even guilty.
Yeah.
They just thought it was some black.
Statistically, they found that for every 10 executions, or every 9 executions, there's been at least one exoneration, which is like a finding of innocence. And that's the ones that they caught, that they did investigations on, that they, tested DNA, that
Right.
they, looked at the ballistics and forensic stuff, and found that people were innocent. Surely some people slipped through the cracks and were executed,
Right.
And some of the governors, I mean, and unfortunately, it's all the Republicans, following Trump's playbook, saying, "No, we don't care. We don't care if they're innocent. We don't care if
We don't
about
care.
anything."
What is
Yeah.
that?
Right.
I mean, how can you even say that?
Right. Well, they hold up the victims. Look at the poor victims. Nobody's advocating for them. Of course, people advocate for the victims. It's heartbreaking what happens to people,
Right.
and when someone is killed in our society. I mean, people fighting for change are not fighting for. So we'll have a criminal country. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's criminals running the country.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
We can see that now.
Yes, right. Right.
We're like kind of disorganized crime if we are criminals, But yeah, it's sad. But getting back to Pete Seeger, he was. You guys are too young to really know. But
Weren't you there
Where?
when Pete came?
2013. No,
Where did
No.
Pete come to?
10 years
He
ago.
came to the Western New York Peace Center annual dinner. You
2013
weren't there that year.
2013.
You'd
So was it
remember
at the church? Off of
Convention
Clinton?
Center.
No, it was at the convention
I
center.
probably wasn't. That was
Yeah.
the year I graduated from high school.
Oh,
Okay, so yeah, I thought you were still. So maybe you weren't in Peace Jam that year, or maybe you couldn't just make it that night, because everyone in Peace Jam came for free, which is one of the reasons why we didn't make very much money on that dinner, because we had a lot of people, not just from Peace Jam, but other people that we let. In fact, it was such a crazy year that year, because we already had two keynote speakers just because of our. The way the outreach had been done, it was a little bit of a botched job. So we had 2 people coming already, and then Pete at the last.
Pete was like an icon of in the folk music
yes,
world.
very,
Just,
yeah,
going back to the 30s and the 40s, I mean, it was just, his contemporaries were
Woody Guthrie,
big jazz folks,
right,
And politically, he was always very much on the left, with
right.
What's the opera singer's name? He.
They
They got stoned in Poughkeepsie.
God, what's his name?
Paul Robeson.
Paul Robeson.
Paul
Right,
Robeson,
Paul
great,
Robeson.
great orator and
Yeah, a black
opera.
man,
Yeah.
very famous, wonderful. What a citizen of the world. What a courageous.
They were stoned. They
Wonderful.
were stoned by white people in Poughkeepsie,
Right.
New York, when Paul was coming in to do a concert. They
Right.
said, "No, we don't want these black communists coming in here." They're crazy, and they're crazy out there now. Some of them, But anyway, Pete was he was 92 when he came up and did the concert for us. Here.
Because of his friendship with Chuck.
He was
That's why
he was best man at my wedding when I got married in
That's awesome.
1989.
Because Chuck had written to him.
June was best lady.
Chuck had written to him, and so they started a correspondence, and then he visited you in jail, and then, yeah.
Yeah.
And then
we were friends for the next 50 years.
right.
almost.
That's pretty sweet. I
And
think
then
that's cool.
and then he invited him to the annual
Yeah.
dinner, and he came, and it was really either his last or his next to the last public concert
Right.
before he passed.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
lost his wife, Toshi, about 4 months before also.
Right.
They were married for 67 years.
Right.
And then he came in November to here to Buffalo. And then he did one concert in I
With
think Radio-
Arlo Guthrie.
Yeah, at Radio,
Something-
Radio Carnegie Hall. They did an annual thing every year, right?
Oh, was that the other
yeah.
one?
And then
Mhm.
a month later, he passed away.
Mhm.
Yeah. But a great man.
He
I
was.
have to look him up now.
Oh, you do.
I have a DVD of the
For songs?
of
of
the event.
of the
Oh, the
event.
event,
We
mhm.
yeah, actually we should play that
Oh, you guys
sometime.
record the annual dinner?
Yeah.
No, not always, but we did record that one.
Oh.
Yes, we did. Yeah, so I'm looking forward. But anyway, so he was certainly against the death penalty, and he was certainly for, big changes in our society, top to bottom, and certainly in the criminal justice system. And prisoners' rights was always very big with him. But he was sort of, actually, that's one of the things that, Pete was, like the Western New York Peace Center, trying to look at all of those issues. So if it's labor, it's, economic issues, environmental issues. He's very much helping the Hudson, the cleanup of the Hudson,
Yeah.
Youth development, all kinds of things. He was always interested.
Yeah.
But getting back to the death penalty, so if you would speak a little bit about some of the groups now and some of the efforts now, and especially, I don't want us to get too far along without talking about how people can help. So,
Well, right now there's kind of a resurgence, as I mentioned, of the resumption of executions. There've been
Right.
kind of a slowdown and then a shutdown in many places during COVID, which was, COVID was bad for the country, but it was kind of good for the people under death sentence because it kind of put everything on hold. But now it seems that the resurgence is picking up some steam, and but I think a lot of people are rising to the occasion too, and there's coalitions around the country, especially in the killing states, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, Alabama, Arkansas, who are rising to the challenge and fighting it. I was out in Oklahoma a couple of times, recent years. I was there last in, was it August? Where, and that's an interesting state, Oklahoma. It's the end of the Trail of Tears.
right.
And the governor there is he claims to be a Cherokee native, but the Cherokee say no. You have to practice the traditions to be a real Cherokee. You're not a Cherokee. And they supported a woman educator who ran against him for the governorship. But he turns down recommendations from his own pardon and parole board for clemency, and goes ahead with executions. Yeah, he's just bent on killing people, unfortunately. So, but the next execution scheduled is Anthony Sanchez in Oklahoma, and there's really questions about his guilt or innocence.
Sure.
DNA is pointing to another person, possibly his father, who had a relationship with the woman who was killed, and his father passed away since then. But they're hopeful that the high courts will give him take another look at his situation. But so I don't know if I'm gonna. I don't think I'm gonna go out there. Last time I took a bus there, which was interesting, and but I enjoyed the trip, but it was kind of wearing. I'm getting.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm getting a little on an age now. I can't be hanging out in too many bus stations.
Right.
But one of the people there sent me back on the plane. I was booking the the bus thing. She says, no, I got a ticket for you on the plane. I said, you shouldn't do that. It's too expensive. But anyway, so I traveled back in class. But so I may go, but probably not. I'm not feeling too well lately. Some medical issues.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of people active. There's an Oklahoma coalition that's working hard, and a national coalition, also the Abolitionist Action Committee.
Abolitionist
They-
Action Committee.
Yeah, they go. They're doing stuff all around there. I was there in June at the annual Fast and Vigil. Every year they have a Fast and Vigil for 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
From which starts on June 29th, which is the day that the Supreme Court abolished it in '72,
Mm-hmm.
and then to July 2nd, which is when they reinstated it 4 years later in 1976.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, the fight is going to continue, and people aren't, they're not. More and more people are getting informed about the issue and what it means. Buffalo, I always thought of as a good abolitionist entity.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the Charlie Fisher, when he was on the Common Council,
Right.
sponsored a resolution against the death penalty in New York. That was around the time that Mumia in Pennsylvania they were trying to execute him, and also Reverend Pridgeon facilitated one of the abolitionists, Bud Welch, coming in to visit Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
Bud had lost his daughter in the Oklahoma City bombing.
Right.
you
Right.
know. And then what a story his was, I mean, just he said, I went crazy. He says when Julie was killed, he said, and he was against the death penalty. He said, I felt that we don't need a trial. Just kill these two guys, these bombers,
Right. Right.
And so then some months later, he remembered being in the car with Julie, driving her back to
Mm-hmm.
school in Notre Dame,
Mm-hmm.
and there was something about a Texas execution, and she said, Dad, she says, that's wrong. All they're teaching people is violence and hate, And that came back to him, and he started to kind of reflect on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the 1 year anniversary, and remember he was representing the families of the victims. 167 people died in that bombing, The reporter, though, his answers were kind of. And the reporter said, "Well, you do favor executing this McVeigh, don't you?" And he says, "No." He says, "I thought about it." He says, "And I think that I would not honor her memory by wanting him dead. I think I would dishonor her memory. I think she would not want him dead."
Right.
And that went out on the national newswire, international newswire around the world, and he became one of the great spokespersons against the death penalty for many years.
So what year would that have been?
Around 2000.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
McVeigh was executed in what year was it? I think it was around, I don't know, late 90s. The bombing was 1995, and then he called off his appeals. He wanted to be executed. But
He wanted to be executed?
yeah. And his thing was political, it was right wing. But when Bud was here, he was initially coming to Buffalo to give a talk at a church, give a homily. He stayed the whole week giving interviews and going to schools and churches.
Uh-huh.
And then at the end, he asked me and a friend, he says, I'd like to go up and visit Timothy McVeigh's father, Bill, who was up in Pendleton, right?
Right.
And
Yeah, right
so we
around
were
here.
able to arrange their getting together, right? And he went up there and he said, it was just, they fell into each other's arms crying. It was
Right.
just an emotional, draining experience. Because he lost his daughter and Bill McVeigh was going to lose his son.
Yeah.
And so they had that mutual ground of grief,
Right.
to
Right.
meet on. They're still friends, I saw Bud when I went out there last August. And
Mhm.
he said, Chuck, I was doing this for 22 years. He says, I just ran out of gas. He says, I retired 5 years ago.
Sure.
But Yeah.
Well, there should be some rest for the weary.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he's done his
Yeah.
service.
Yeah.
Well, so we're running really low on time now. I just want to take another minute too, just to acknowledge, and not maybe to go into it too far, but we're talking about the death penalty, and right now here in Buffalo, it has come up, and I'm surprised that we didn't even.
I was going to get to it. So
Yeah,
I wanted to
yeah.
ask a question.
So we're here for that question. So we have a little more time left. We have about, say, 7 minutes altogether. But so if we can do a final comments piece. But if we just go think about, the massacre,
Yeah.
and how that fits into this, and people's thoughts or feelings that you just want to share briefly about that. And so why don't we start with you, Ladaisha, because you were.
You
No?
got, we can start.
Well, then I would start with
Yeah.
Sameria, and we
Yeah.
would just go around like we were going. So, do you have some thoughts about how, we've been hearing all of this
About
about
the
the death
massacre.
penalty, and then about Gendron, Peyton Gendron.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really hard in this moment. Like, I mean, the main thing, like, especially with your story and just the victims of the families,
Mm-hmm.
they have, obviously, like, you can resonate with their pain right now. Like, they want, they want justice in the way they think it should be. But at the same time, there's, like, this element of forgiveness that we have to take into account. I mean, obviously, like, he's wrong for what he does, but two wrongs, I think something that we've all agreed on is two wrongs don't make a right.
Mm-hmm.
Killing people does not bring, because they killed, does not bring justice. So,
Right.
I think honestly, there's justice in letting him sit there and reflect on everything that he did. I mean, sitting there, and I mean, those spirits are haunting you.
Right,
I'm
right,
sure.
right.
Mhm.
Somewhere along the line, definitely got to come to terms with what he did.
What you done, and I
Mhm.
think by killing him is just letting him go off too easy,
Hmm.
in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sameria. Chuck,
Well,
I know we've talked about
I
it.
think that was that kind of says it,
Mhm.
But I was disturbed. Well, first I was glad that the initial response from the families was, aside from the unfathomable, the endless grief that
Right.
they've experienced, and many people in the Buffalo community too.
Mm.
That there wasn't no initial call out for vengeance, for revenge, or for the death penalty. I was glad to hear that. I said, this is my community too, and we don't need to kill to, have justice. Put him in, keep him in. He's not going anywhere for next 60, 70 years, and I have no problem with that. What he did is just this. If anybody deserves a death penalty, certainly cases like that. But no, you have to draw the line. You have to get rid of it altogether. It's the baseline. Anthony Amsterdam, who argued the decision in '72, he said it's the baseline of our humanity, the death penalty. You go for the death, and that's the road you're going down on. And so government, if they want to go down on that road, they're taking us to a dark place,
Mhm.
And the mayor here called in the middle of June. He called for the death penalty for mass murderers, and considering his history, I think it was an opportunistic thing. And I'm sure there's some people among the families of the victims who legitimately feel that the death penalty is appropriate and right. And I can't argue with that. I can't argue with their pain and their grief. I just hope that somewhere along the line that they can come to terms with the loss of their loved one, So, but I think Brown's thing was an opportunistic thing. I think what he did with India Cummings, he shouldn't even be mayor. She won the election. What the hell?
Right.
I felt that he stole it.
India Walton.
Yeah.
India Walton.
What did I say?
Cummings.
Cummings.
Oh, my God.
I've made that mistake myself before. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
easy to do.
So
They're both two different, very different figures,
Yeah.
but a similar name.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.
And Ladaisha, what are you thinking?
Well, I
feeling?
mean, just to answer the original question, like any thoughts that I ever had, um, in regards to when they did bring up the death penalty after
Mhm.
the top shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Just being honest, and my thoughts were neither whether we should have a death penalty or not. My thoughts were more so surprised that they even would consider it for this white male, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the death penalty is solely reserved for black and brown people, but I mean, the statistics showed, kind of like you said.
Mm.
I was kind of just like, oh, wow, you know, but in the back of my head, it was like, they're not going to let that happen, you know.
Is that your
Eric.
San Quentin.
wow? Okay,
Right on time.
it's okay. We have
You have
4
3
minutes. Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
You have a prepaid call from Lee Barnett, an inmate at the California State Prison, San Quentin, California.
Wow.
This call and/or telephone
Try to hold it up to the when yeah
prepaid call. You will not be charged
the
for
speaker.
Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Howdy, howdy.
Hey,
How you
Eric. Okay, you caught us in the last 5 minutes of the program. I'm here with Ladaisha and Sameria
Mhm.
and Vicky Ross, the program lady. And we were hoping that you were able to call. So we have a few minutes, and maybe you'd like to respond to some of the questions people have here. Sameria. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Eric.
Hi.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Where are you calling from right now?
San Quentin State Prison, Condemned Row.
And who
Okay.
did the newspaper at, right?
Oh, and you've been featured on the newspaper.
No.
Oh, have
Oh,
you?
Have you been featured on the newspaper?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Well, do you have any intentions on writing an article for it?
Sure.
Okay.
I write quite a bit.
Oh, good.
okay, good.
Good. Well, you know what I would ask you is what would be your message that you'd like to send out to people on the air here?
I think the most important thing is I've been down for 37 years now, and
Mhm.
you know, and like most of the guys out here, I can't get a fair hearing because most of the judges are ex-prosecutors.
Uh-huh.
And they're elevated to the bench. They're elevated to the bench to do what the other prosecutors want, of course, you know,
Right.
which is affirmed.
Right.
And so you basically have a corrupt court system, and that's why the United States has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners, you know.
Yeah.
And you know,
Mhm.
like it's not just a California problem; it's a national problem where
Right.
this goes on.
Right.
Where they keep putting the prosecutors, you know, they keep taking the prosecutors out of the prosecutor's office and give them a judge's robe, and now he's the judge that's going to rule on cases that come before him from his party prosecutors.
Right.
So it's a very corrupt system,
Right.
very corrupt.
Right. Well, actually,
And,
we're doing another radio show very shortly that will start up again in another 5 minutes or so. So maybe you can you call back or hold on? I don't know if that's possible. Is that possible?
I got the I have the phone up until I have it for like another half hour if you need me. You know?
Sure. So Chuck, can Chuck call you back, or you want to call us in 10 minutes or something? Because
Yeah.
we're going to talk about the criminal justice system in general,
All out.
Good.
too.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Phone on my tablet, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I'll tell you what the San Quentin newspaper connection is.
In the interim.
Someone mentioned it earlier.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Eddie.
Eric.
Eric, it's so great to have you calling in. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Sameria, Chuck, and Ladaisha, and to all who are listening out there in wherever you're listening from.
Radio Land.
Radio Land or wherever, whatever land you're listening from. Anyway, we thank you so much, and we'll be right back on with another show. But in the meanwhile, this is Talking Peace, and together we've been talking peace in truth and love.
All right. All right, so we...